Hi, it's Murphy. This is my channel, Murphy's Every Whim, where I talk about books. Just books and books and books and books. Okay, I talk about other things too. Today I'm going to talk about Alaska. For Shorty September, I'm reading 12 books, all somewhere between 100 and 180 pages long. This week I'm reading An Unexpected Purchase. I read Attu Boy, a young Alaskan's World War II memoir by Nick Golodoff. It says it's a memoir, but actually only about, I would say, a third of the book or a little bit more is actually directly from Nick Golodoff. But this is a good companion book to another book that I've read, which is Last Letters from Attu. And that's a story of Etta Jones, who was a teacher on Attu at the time. So, where is Attu? Attu is an Aleutian island. It is the farthest west point of North America. So it's way out on the end of the chain of islands. This is a World War II memoir because the Aleutians were invaded by and captured by the Japanese during World War II. And Nick Golodoff was 6 years old when the Japanese invaded Attu. He and all of the people of the village were taken as prisoners of war, and they spent some time on Hokkaido. Then those that survived returned and couldn't return to Attu because it had been basically devastated, and there were so few survivors that the United States government didn't think that they could make a go of having a village on Attu. I mean, they would basically have to start from scratch. There was still a military presence on Attu at the time after World War II, and so they were resettled on Attica, which is another island. The invasion was on June 7th, 1942, and there were, records vary, but I'd say there were 44, that seemed to be the most common number, 44 people living on Attu, 42 Attuans of a wide variety of ages, and one that was just born like days before the invasion, and then a couple, Emma and Foster Jones. Emma Jones was the school teacher. They were both 60 years old. Emma they had traveled around Alaska and had taught at various villages, and so they were teaching at Attu. And Foster, her husband, did some work there. He also ran the radio. So he was the source of communications to other places. The island is isolated. The locals either trap or fish. There was also a store which was run by someone from Seattle, but he wasn't on the island at the time. The Japanese invaded. They killed Foster Jones. They wounded one woman, and they occupied the island for a while, and then they removed all of the Attuans and Etta Jones. So they rounded them all up and took them to Japan, put them in two separate POW camps. Etta went to a camp with other white women, and the Attuans were kept in a building together. Nick was 6 when this happened. For the next 3 years, they spent their time in Japan as prisoners of war with very little food, some health care, but not great health care. And of the 42 Attuans who were taken to Japan, 24 survived that 3 years of captivity. Then they were brought back, and after going to Manila and Seattle and various other places, they were finally resettled on Atka, another Aleutian island. What happened to the island of Attu? The Japanese stayed and occupied Attu and at least one other Aleutian island until the Battle of Attu, which was May 11th through 30th, 1943. And so the U.S. tried to take the island back, and they ended up succeeding. There were still, just like the stories you hear about surviving Japanese soldiers on South Pacific islands that continue to resist against the Allied troops that were there. The same happened, and so the island wasn't completely cleared of Japanese for a couple of years, but the United States took control of the island, set up a radar station there, used the harbor, and maintained that island for the rest of the war. And in the process of the Battle of Attu, the village of Attu was obliterated. This book actually has 5 voices to it, not just Nick, but other survivors. They were Popeye Golodoff, who was an uncle or cousin of Nick, Olian Prokopov, and she's Nick's mother. She had remarried later, and that's why her name is different. Mike Lokinen and Alex Prosov. And so all of those voices are in here. The first, like I said, about a third of the book is from Nick himself. It's very rustic sounding. He's remembering as an older man, a man who's in his 60s. He's trying to remember what happened to him when he was 6. So he doesn't have that much to tell, just little episodes here and there. The 4 other voices, the editor of the book collected those stories, put them in chronological order, and uses those to fill in some of the details. We find that the stories told by these various people are different. So some are contradictory. For instance, one says they never had any vegetables at the POW camp, and another said they did have vegetables, that they would work for local people around where they were being kept in their gardens, and they would let them take some things, probably the cast-offs. They rarely had meat. I think they remember having meat for one dinner. Before they left, one of the soldiers on Attu told them to pack up as much food as they could because there wasn't that much food in Japan. And so at least at the beginning, they had food that they'd brought themselves. But after that, they had a small portion of rice each day and very little else. And for that reason, some died of beriberi, some died of tuberculosis, some died just of malnutrition or other diseases that could be a problem when you're not getting that much to eat. Of Nick's family, the survivors were his mother, he, and a brother and a sister. And there were 8 siblings altogether, 9, I believe, counting siblings from a different marriage. And of those, I believe only the 3, Nick and a brother and a sister, survived, and the mother. The story tells of relationships that they had with the soldiers that were there. They actually had a policeman living with them in Japan who didn't take care of them, but he's the one who policed them. And he became really good friends with them and tried to help them as much as he could. Nick actually went back to Japan later in life and met some people that he knew from that time, a doctor, a soldier that he has a picture of him and this soldier that was taken when he was in Japan. He has, except for the starvation, relatively fond memories of Japan. He thought that the people in Japan were good people. The other voices that are used, their stories of Attu and being POWs in Japan don't contradict that. They're worried that maybe they didn't get as good health care as they needed, but probably, in my mind, from the description, they got better health care than they might have. They didn't experience any violence from the Japanese after the invasion. The invasion was violent, but after that, they didn't experience any violence from the Japanese. So Nick ends up in Attica. He gets married. He has children. He had trouble with school because he was taken to Japan when he was 6 and he returned when he was 9 or 10. And they put him in kindergarten at 10. He never really caught up. And at 18, even though he could have learned more in school, they wouldn't let him attend school anymore because he was too old. And so most of what he's learned in his life, he did through reading. He did odd jobs. He actually worked on Attu at one time, gathering scrap from, the occupation of Attu by both the Japanese and the American Army. He does fishing and things like that. He's built his own boats and lived out his life on Attica. The person that put this book together included history of Attu, some information about the geography, more about the family trees of the people involved, and then just general information about how they obtained the narratives that they put together. The voices are rustic, and if it weren't for the combining of the voices, the story of Nick is missing a lot of details. And so it took all of that to make a complete story. It's a short read. It's only like 100 pages long, and I think that it's a good companion to the Etta Jones story, which is a biography, Last Letters from Attu. But she tells a different story after they get to Japan because she was held in a different place. And she also was 60 years old. She had a lot of illnesses. She was housed with nurses, and she was forever thankful for being taken care of by the nurses to help her survive. And so she did get back to the United States, but she never went back to Alaska. She went back home to her family and stayed there. If you want to know about this very small part of World War II, I'd recommend these two books, but you can also get books about the Battle of Attu. So that was an unexpected purchase, and that's because while I was in Alaska this summer, my sister had pulled out some books that she thought I might like to read, and I didn't really get a chance to read them there. And she says, well, take them with you. And I took a couple, but I didn't take Attu Boy. I didn't feel like it was worth carrying it back to Iowa and then having to return it to her in Alaska. So when I got home, I was very surprised to find out I'd already purchased it. So that's why I read it. I appreciate Shorty September for getting me to put some books like this on my reading list so that I would get them done. And that's it. It's a beautiful day. I had Ecuadorian food with a friend for lunch, and I'm glad I didn't belch any while I was doing this, so I didn't have to edit anything out. Am I going to edit out the part where I talk about belching? I don't know. That's it. Thanks for listening to me. I'll see you next time. Take care. Attu Boy, a young Alaskan's World War II memoir by Nick Golodoff, who are part of the Aleut, are part of the Aleutian, and Emma Jones, sorry. And now I'm worried that whether it's Etta or Emma. It's Etta. I don't know if I said Emma or Etta all this time, but it's Etta Jones, and probably I got confused because it's Attu and Etta. So